So, quick question. How many of you have ever said, I'm fine, when you are absolutely not fine? Yeah, we all do it. Sometimes out of habit, sometimes to avoid awkward conversations, and sometimes because, let's be honest, it just feels safer to keep things bottled up. But here's the kicker. Suppressing emotions doesn't make them disappear. It just buries them deep where they simmer. And let me tell you, what's buried alive never dies quietly. I once came across a study, one of those studies that stops you in your tracks, where researchers found that when people suppress their emotions, their stress hormones spike. Their immune system weakens, and get this, even their memory gets worse. It's like the brain goes, oh, we're pretending we're fine. Cool, I'll just shut down all unnecessary functions, including, remembering things. So today we're diving into something we all do but rarely talk about, the hidden cost of suppressing emotions. And I'm not here to tell you to cry at every meeting or wear your heart on your sleeve 24/7. I just want us to understand what happens when we shut down our emotions for too long and what we can do instead. Here are 5 things science reveals about suppressing emotions. First, it makes stress chronic. We think we're doing ourselves a favor by pushing emotions down. We tell ourselves, I don't have time for this, or it's not that big of a deal. And sometimes, sure, we can get away with it for a while. But emotions aren't items on a to-do list. They don't just disappear when we ignore them. They build, they pile up, and eventually they find their way out, sometimes in ways we don't even recognize. There's a reason why the people who say, I don't do feelings, are often the ones snapping over things that seem small. Someone forgets to refill the coffee pot, and suddenly it's a personal attack. A minor inconvenience turns into a full-blown meltdown. It's not really about the coffee or the slow driver or the unread text message. It's about everything unspoken, everything suppressed. Because emotions don't just vanish when we avoid them. They sit there bubbling under the surface, waiting for an opening, and if we don't give them one, they force their way out, usually in ways that don't serve us. Science backs this up in a way that's honestly a little unsettling. Studies show that when we suppress emotions, our bodies still react as if we're experiencing them. The amygdala, the part of the brain that processes fear and stress, lights up like a firework, sending signals to the nervous system that say, we're in danger. Heart rate spikes, muscles tense, stress hormones flood the body, and we might not even realize it's happening. I read this study once that compared people who regularly suppress emotions with those who express them in healthy ways. And the results? Kind of mind-blowing. The suppressors had consistently higher blood pressure, they had more stress hormones floating around in their system, and they even had weaker immune function. Let me say that again. People who bottled up their emotions actually got sick more often than those who didn't. The body keeps the score, whether we like it or not. And maybe the most surprising thing, suppressing emotions doesn't just affect our health. It affects our ability to think clearly. Researchers found that when people actively push their emotions away, their memory actually got worse. It's like the brain decides, oh, we're ignoring this? Cool, let's just block out everything related to it. And the problem is, that doesn't just apply to the hard stuff. It applies to the good stuff too. Because we don't get to selectively numb. When we suppress one thing, we dull everything. Now, I get it. Some of us were raised in environments where emotions weren't exactly welcome, where the message was, shake it off, keep moving. And if that's the case, acknowledging emotions, letting them exist, can feel unnatural, maybe even dangerous. But here's the thing, avoiding emotions doesn't make us strong, it makes us brittle. Because real strength isn't about shutting down, it's about staying open. It's about learning how to navigate emotions instead of fearing them. So what do we do instead? Because let's be honest, most of us can't just flip a switch and become emotional experts overnight. But what we can do is start small. We can practice noticing what we're feeling before we rush to push it down. We can stop using busyness as a way to outrun our emotions. And we can remind ourselves that feeling something deeply doesn't mean we're out of control. It just means we're human. And if the thought of all this makes you a little uncomfortable, that's okay. Discomfort is just a sign that something's shifting. And that shift, That's where real change happens. Second, it damages relationships. We think we're protecting people by not sharing how we feel. We tell ourselves, I don't want to burden them, or it's not worth the fight. But here's the thing, suppression doesn't just affect us, it affects the people around us too. It creates distance, even when we don't mean for it to, because emotions don't just disappear when we push them down. They sit there unspoken but still present, shaping how we show up in our relationships. Have you ever been in a conversation where you could just feel something was off? Maybe a friend said they were fine, but you knew they weren't. Maybe a coworker acted like everything was normal, but there was this undercurrent, this tension you couldn't quite name. That's what happens when emotions are suppressed. They don't stay hidden. They leak out in body language, in tone, in the energy we bring into a room, and whether we realize it or not, the people around us feel it. There's this fascinating study that looked at couples who avoided expressing their emotions during conflict. And guess what? They didn't just feel more distant in the moment. The emotional suppression actually increased their overall dissatisfaction in the relationship over time. They were less connected, less attuned to each other, and more likely to break up. Because when we don't express what's real for us, we don't just protect others from our feelings, we cut them off from truly knowing us. And it's not just romantic relationships, it's friendships, families, work environments. I once heard someone describe emotional suppression as emotional insulation. It keeps things from getting messy, but it also keeps things from getting real. And real connection, the kind that makes us feel seen, understood, and valued, requires honesty. It requires a level of openness that suppression just doesn't allow. Now, this doesn't mean we have to spill every emotion we feel in real time. Expressing emotions isn't the same as emotionally dumping. It's not about turning every disagreement into a dramatic monologue. It's about being aware of what we're feeling and finding a way to communicate it in a way that builds connection instead of shutting it down. And I know for some of us, that's easier said than done. If you grew up in a home where emotions weren't really talked about, this kind of openness might feel uncomfortable, maybe even unsafe. Maybe you learned early on that keeping your emotions to yourself was the best way to avoid conflict, or that vulnerability was a risk not worth taking. But here's the truth. Suppression might feel like protection, but it's actually isolation in disguise. So how do we start shifting this? How do we move from suppressing emotions to expressing them in a way that strengthens our relationships? It starts with small, intentional choices. It starts with noticing when we're holding something back and asking ourselves, what's stopping me from saying this out loud? It starts with recognizing that honesty, real, thoughtful, compassionate honesty, is not just for our benefit, but for the people we care about too. And yeah, vulnerability can feel risky, but you know what's riskier? A life where we're constantly editing ourselves, where we're in relationships but never fully seen, where we tell ourselves we're protecting people, but really we're just pushing them away. Connection isn't built on perfection, it's built on truth. And the truth is, our emotions, spoken or unspoken, will always impact the people around us. The choice we have is whether we let them create distance or deepen connection. Third, it takes a toll on physical health, but maybe the most surprising thing, emotional suppression doesn't just affect our bodies, it affects our memories too. And I know that sounds a little out there, right? Like, what do my emotions have to do with my ability to remember things? But the science on this is pretty clear. When we push emotions down, we don't just bury the feelings, we bury parts of our experience along with them. There was a study where researchers asked participants to watch an emotional video. Half the group was told to suppress their emotions, to keep a neutral expression no matter what. The other half was allowed to react naturally. Afterward, they were asked to recall details from the video, and guess what? The people who suppressed their emotions had a significantly harder time remembering what they had just seen. Their brains had literally stored less information. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Our brains don't separate emotional experiences from neutral ones. So when we make it a habit to suppress emotions, whether it's grief, anger, or even joy, We're training our brains to disengage from the moment. And over time, that changes how we experience life. It's like walking through the world in a fog, never fully present, never fully there. And I don't know about you, but that hits deep. Because when I think about the moments that matter most, real laughter, deep conversations, those tiny unexpected moments of connection, I don't want to just go through them. I want to feel them. I want to remember them. And I sure as hell don't want to miss them because I was too busy trying to keep my emotions in check. But I get it. Some of us learned early on that showing too much emotion was risky. Maybe we grew up in homes where big feelings weren't welcomed, or being too sensitive or too dramatic got us shut down. So we adapted. We learned how to shrink our reactions, how to keep things light, how to push things down so we didn't make other people uncomfortable. And for a while it might have worked. The problem is, when we spend years editing our emotions, we end up editing ourselves. We lose touch with what we actually feel. And before we know it, we're not just suppressing sadness or anger, we're numbing joy, excitement, and even love. Because, and this is the kicker, we don't get to selectively numb. We can't say, I don't want to feel pain, but I still want to feel joy. It doesn't work that way. When we shut down one emotion, we turn down the volume on all of them. So what do we do with this? Because let's be real, none of us are walking around thinking, I'd love to have worse memory and feel less joy in my life. But if we've been taught to suppress for years, maybe even decades, shifting out of that pattern doesn't happen overnight. One of the most powerful things we can do is start paying attention to what we're feeling in real time. Not analyzing, not fixing, just noticing, just letting the feeling be there without immediately shoving it aside. It might sound small, but this one shift, allowing emotions to surface without judgment, can change everything. And if the idea of feeling emotions more fully makes you uncomfortable, that's okay. Discomfort is part of the process. It means something is shifting, and that shift, that's how we move from just existing to actually living. Fourth, it stifles creativity and problem solving. And listen, I get it. Some of us grew up in homes where emotions weren't exactly welcome, where the message was toughen up, shake it off, keep moving. And if that's the case, acknowledging emotions, letting them exist, can feel unnatural, maybe even dangerous. But here's the reality. Avoiding emotions doesn't make us strong. It makes us fragile. Because real strength isn't about shutting down. It's about staying open. It's about learning how to navigate emotions instead of fearing them. And I know what you might be thinking, but what if I don't have time for all that? What if feeling my emotions just slows me down? That's a fair question. We live in a culture that rewards pushing through, that praises grit and resilience, but doesn't always talk about what those things actually require. And here's the truth. Real resilience doesn't come from suppressing emotions. It comes from processing them, from understanding them, from allowing them to exist without letting them take over. There's this study that completely shifted the way I think about emotional strength. Researchers found that when people suppress their emotions during stressful situations, they actually experienced higher levels of physiological distress, not less. Their heart rate spiked, their stress hormones shot up, their brains went into overdrive trying to keep everything locked down. And over time, that chronic stress made them less adaptable, less resilient, less capable of handling challenges in the long run. Meanwhile, the people who acknowledged their emotions, who let themselves feel without judgment, had a totally different response. Their stress levels still rose because they were human, but they also recovered faster. Their nervous systems didn't stay stuck in overdrive. They moved through their emotions instead of getting trapped in them. That's real resilience. That's real emotional strength. And look, I get why suppression can feel like the safer choice. For some of us, emotions were never modeled in a healthy way. Maybe we grew up with parents who exploded in anger, so we learned that it was better to keep our own frustration bottled up. Maybe we watched someone close to us struggle with overwhelming sadness, and we decided, consciously or not, that we wouldn't let ourselves go there. Maybe we were told directly or indirectly that being emotional made us weak. And we internalize that belief so deeply that we still hesitate to let ourselves feel, even now. But here's what I want to say. Feeling emotions doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. It means you're engaged in your own life. It means you're awake to what's happening inside you instead of sleepwalking through it. And that is the exact opposite of fragility. That is strength. Now, does this mean we have to let every emotion take over the moment it shows up? No, this isn't about indulging every feeling without boundaries. It's about recognizing that emotions are data. They're signals. And when we ignore them, we're ignoring valuable information about what's happening inside us. So the next time you catch yourself pushing an emotion down, whether it's frustration, sadness, or even joy, just pause. Just take a moment to ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? And then, instead of running from it, just let it be there, even for a few seconds, even if it's uncomfortable, because that tiny moment of acknowledgement, that's where the real strength begins. Fifth, it disconnects us from ourselves, and maybe the hardest truth of all, when we suppress our emotions, we don't just lose touch with ourselves, we lose touch with the people who matter most. We think we're keeping the peace, avoiding conflict, making things easier, but what we're really doing is building walls. And the people in our lives, our partners, our kids, our friends, they can feel it. Even if we don't say a word, even if we keep smiling and nodding, they know when we're holding something back. I had a conversation once with someone who told me, I don't bring up my feelings because I don't want to make things harder for my family. They have enough to deal with. And I get that. I do. But what I also know, what the research shows, what I've seen play out over and over again, is that unspoken emotions don't stay quiet. They come out in other ways. In our tone, in our body language, in the way we withdraw or lash out or just check out altogether. And this is where things get tricky, because when we suppress emotions long enough, we start convincing ourselves that we're fine. I'm just tired. I'm just busy. I'm just dealing with a lot right now. But the people around us, they feel the distance. They sense that something's off. And when they ask, are you okay? And we say, I'm fine over and over again, eventually they stop asking. There's this fascinating study about emotional suppression in relationships. Researchers found that when one partner regularly suppresses emotions, the other partner actually experiences increased stress. Let me say that again. When we bottle things up, the people we love feel it in their own nervous systems. Because connection isn't built on what we don't say. It's built on what we're willing to share. And I know sometimes we avoid sharing because we don't want to upset people. We don't want to cause conflict. We don't want to seem too much. But here's the paradox. Suppressing emotions doesn't prevent conflict. It creates it, because unspoken feelings don't stay unspoken forever. They build, they seep into our interactions. And when they finally come out, because they will come out, it's often in ways that cause more harm than if we had just been honest in the first place. And listen, I'm not saying we need to spill our emotions all the time or turn every moment into an intense heart-to-heart, but there's a difference between thoughtful emotional expression and total emotional avoidance. And the difference, it's what allows real connection to happen. So what does this look like in practice? It means noticing when we're shutting down and asking why. It means giving ourselves permission to say, hey, this is hard for me to talk about, but I want to be honest. It means recognizing that vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's an invitation for deeper understanding, for stronger relationships, for the kind of connection that isn't just about being near someone, but actually being seen by them. And yeah, that's scary. It's uncomfortable. But if the choice is between temporary discomfort and a lifetime of emotional distance, I know which one I'd choose. Because at the end of the day, the people who love us don't need us to be perfect. They need us to be real. So here's the truth. The emotions we bury don't disappear. They shape us in ways we don't always see. They show up in our bodies, in our relationships, in the way we experience our own lives. And when we suppress them, we don't just avoid pain. We numb joy, connection, and even our sense of self. But here's the good news. We can unlearn suppression. We can choose a different way, a way that doesn't mean being ruled by emotions, but instead listening to them, a way that lets us feel fully alive instead of just getting through the day. This isn't about being perfect at it. It's about being intentional. It's about catching ourselves when we start to shut down and choosing, even in small ways, to open back up. Because when we do, we don't just change our own lives, we change the way we show up for the people we love. And that's worth it. That's what real strength looks like. Good luck, stay brave, stay open, and remember, you were never meant to go through this life disconnected from yourself.